Okay, everybody's sitting very far apart. If we could try to squeeze in a little bit, make it more intimate, that'd be nice. But it's okay, I'm not gonna make you guys move. Because we only have 15 minutes, I'm gonna rush through this a little bit. You only have 1 minute for each, huh? Okay. For every question that I have, just kidding. Can we do a quick introduction of who we are?
So I'm Kat, I'm director of Kubo, which is a public-private initiative to support startups in the Philippines. So I guess we discussed a little bit about like some countries having more or less government support. I guess our model is, it's a combination of both, right? So largely private sector driven and operated, but with the support of the government.
Yes, I am Jay, and I'm CEO of Launch Garage. We are a startup accelerator in Manila, and we have been an accelerator since 2012, actually. We stopped in 2013, but we resumed as a space-based accelerator in 2016. We're purely private sector, although we collaborate closely with government agencies like the Department of Science and Technology and DTI, trading industry. And we have about 34 startups under our portfolio. Yes, we're a platform that accelerates these startups towards pre-Series A funding. So we start up seed and then send them up to Series A.
Okay, so the two of you run sort of like an incubation accelerator program. Can you tell us a little bit more? What are the kind of startups trends that you're seeing, or what kind of startups are you incubating in your, your own space? And how are they progressing so far?
Over the years, we've seen evolution of verticals, and I guess we started out first with some startups that were playing in the e-commerce space, which was quite common about 2 years ago. And however, we've seen an emergence of fintech startups, whether it's by virtue of the market environment or the nature of the common businesses, the gaps in financial services and in banking, etc. But we've seen that coming out, and aside from just pure fintech, we've seen a lot of blockchain players support that as well.
So I guess, so one of the things we do at Kubo is we do a coupons, we encourage collaboration, and one of our programs under that's actually to sort of map out, right, like what sort of startups exist in the Philippines and what industries to get into. So I guess we've been doing a few reports on this past couple of years, and what we have seen is, as Jay did mention, fintech is definitely an interesting space. I think it's quite common in Southeast Asia, like how that plays into e-commerce and sort of the growing consumer-driven kind of economy, right? Like the middle class and like, so when you look at e-commerce, of course, always like aside from the sort of payments, fintech, access to credit side of things, and mobile wallets, all that stuff, right? You're also looking at the logistics aspect, or how to get to, in our case, 7,000 islands, right? And in Indonesia, it was a bit more, right? 3 times that, I guess. But so that's definitely an interesting space. In the Philippines in particular, I think we also have like a big history in terms of providing like services, right? It's a big part of our economy. So I think we do have there is a lot of opportunity to work with corporates and also sort of having solutions for the B2B/services industry, and in particular, of course, AI, which is, said to potentially disrupt that. I also quickly mentioned something about like growing consumer base, right? So again, a shared characteristic with many of Southeast Asia or /ASEAN, right? So I guess a quick rundown of the stats in Philippines, it's about 100 million population, right? Similar, right? Like 50-60-ish% internet penetration, 100% mobile, 10 hours-ish on the internet every day. So of course, when you have those types of numbers, like anything that has to do with sort of like advertising /retail figuring out like what media people are consuming and looking at. Like there are definitely also a lot of startups working around those spaces. So I think those are the hot ones. But at the same time, where I think it's interesting for startups that want to have a significant presence in Southeast Asia and in the Philippines in particular is really how do you solve like all of these big problems that we still have, right? Like so delivering education, healthcare, you know, these real world problems that again maybe aren't super deep tech, right, in terms of the technology platforms being used, but you know, address problems for the majority of the populations, even outside of just the big metro areas.
Just a quick question. How many of you guys are entering Philippines from the crowd? So a couple of people wanting to go into Philippines. Okay, you guys have 1 minute each. Entice them. What are you gonna say to tell them like, guys, go to Philippines? Because you know, you guys are slightly a bit further away. Like for us, going to Jakarta is just, you know, one flight. I mean, it's also one flight to Philippines, but 4 hours. Like, you know, what can you say to entice these people to go to Philippines?
I guess I'd start with you won't be the first. So a lot of people have come in already, and that's sort of like validation for the market. We have a big market, and it's a consumer-based market. We've got our economy's healthy, so people are spending. People are spending a lot on e-commerce, which further drives logistics play and payment gateways, etc. Another thing that would probably encourage you is that we've got large English-speaking population. You need not localize much. We have a talent pool, which is also English-speaking. So if you're used to, if your engineering team is English-speaking or English-based, it's easy enough to migrate. We also have just fixed up our regulatory setup. It's easier now to start businesses in the Philippines, and that's a development that just happened in the past 6 months. We just passed a law. Now you could actually start a company as a one-man corporation, just like some of the friendlier jurisdictions.
Does it have to be Philippines citizen?
Yeah, well, it has to
It
be.
depends on the industry
Yeah,
you're in.
we have a negative list of how do you call this? Industries that are still restricted, but that's also loosening up.
And for some sectors, quite friendly actually. So, for example, our central bank is quite.
Yeah, we're very fintech friendly now.
Yeah.
We're quite liberal with regards to treating blockchain companies, for example. We're coming out with rules on ICOs, which is a good thing. We've got our own, or at least the private sector setting up sandboxes with the help of the government. We've got some huge banks that are very fintech startup friendly. So that's an encouraged fintech startup.
I guess since I have a minute, I'll just add a little bit to what Jay's mentioned, right? So, I mean, to be specific, right, in terms of the economic growth, I think, again, similar to a lot of our neighbors, it's been for the past decade consistently, like, 6% if not higher, right? In terms of the, the law, right? So the Innovative Startup Act, that not only freed up like capital for startup investment, but also looks at things like immigration policy, right? Which should make it easier for you to bring in talent to the Philippines. Talent, Jay already mentioned it, but it's, in addition to speaking English, it's also still relatively cheap, right? Like, talent is abundant. We have hundreds of universities kind of churning out like IT/tech graduates, and they do have experience working because of our sort of outsourcing background, right? Like, we do have experience working with sort of multinational kind of setups, right? I don't know what. So you mentioned talent, economic growth.
Well, there's this nuanced quality to our market. We actually have a huge migrant population.
Yeah, like a huge diaspora too.
So that sort of like created a unique opportunity to create businesses around the remittance space. And when you talk about remittance, it's not just pure sending cash over. It's actually setting up companies where you allow the diaspora to pay for education for families back home,
So the
consumer
money is being
products,
spent
food.
also in the
Yes,
Philippines.
in the Philippines.
I think maybe I'll also give an example really quickly, right? So, I mean, I think Indonesia is obviously the biggest in our region, but it's also quite tough, and there are like lots of strong, very local players. If you're thinking of the next market that maybe you want to expand to as a startup that wants to go regional, right? And I guess it is important to have a regional play when, especially for a Malaysian startup, right? Like, you should look at the Philippines because it's been done there, right? Like, if you look at Grab, for example, or Honest Bee, right? The Philippines was their largest markets usually, especially when they were, or their first markets that they enter as they were deciding to go regional. So I think it's a good place to test whether your product or your startup could have regional legs, I guess. And you know, and Filipinos generally are open to adopting and like sort of using tech, right? So in terms of market, again, it's really good in that sense, and like, you know, it is a market that can make money for tech startups if you decide to do it. So why not?
So language is a plus.
Mhm.
The talent pool is there. They're used to working with international companies. There's immigration policies that are great in the Philippines. What are the common challenges, or do we see VCs going in there for Philippines?
So
I mean, they really want to go to Indonesia.
Right.
What about Philippines?
So capital is definitely something that's difficult in the Philippines. So again, when we were sort of studying the ecosystem, right? Like local VCs are few and far between. Most, I mean, if you don't go there to raise money, right? I think that's definitely not something you should do. But at the same time, there is, from a revenue perspective, I mean, there are sort of large CVC/companies, especially that are, you know, that do drive like a large part of the economy there, that are looking at, you know, digital transformation, investing more in tech startups and startup companies, right? So that is a potential, you know, avenue, right? But at the same time, I think if you're able to prove traction in the Philippines, that does allow you to, you know, raise capital elsewhere. So I wouldn't go there to raise money necessarily. There isn't like a lot of sort of grants also from the government or things like that, especially for foreigners. So realistically, that's not what I would do. And I guess in terms of challenges, ease of doing business, not the easiest place, right? It's not like Singapore or Hong Kong or, you know, Estonia or something, right? Where you can set up a company in 5 minutes online. Definitely not the case, but it doesn't mean, you know, I mean, I think the challenges are worth it.
It's got the
Well,
market.
just to expound on that, you know, it won't happen overnight. On the national level, the incentives are there. The funny thing is there are incentives in the local level, the municipal level, the district level. But when you go to the district offices, they don't know what you're talking about, although it's law already. There are incentives. So, you know, the government just has to get their act together. It would be, well, there are some new funds that have opened, just like what Kat mentioned. Some of the CVCs have actually just opened a $150 million fund. Active fund that's being managed by Kickstart Ventures now. And lately, in the past couple of months, I've met with a bunch of VCs from the region who want to enter there, who are very curious and are very excited to come in and fund local startups. So you may want to set up your startup in the Philippines if that's the idea. There have been some of the notable regional VCs that have invested there. Moxil, Wavemaker is there. Who else? Golden Gate. So they're all there. They've made their investments. Not as much as they did in Indonesia, though. But I think the interest has grown, has risen, and with the notice of the market size, and the notice when they notice that the market is very responsive now to tech-based or on-demand services, then it's just going to grow.
Okay, so in terms of consumer products, right? So there's of course fashion, food, FMCG, and the whole shenanigans in consumer goods. Like, what is the one that if any of us run any form of e-commerce, which one will totally make it? If we enter the market, like, what are the people like? What do they, what are they interested to buy online?
Food. I don't know if it's the same elsewhere, the region, but if you go to a milk tea place, you'll see more Grab Express drivers lined up than actual milk tea consumers. It's crazy. So you've got this whole fad that's bubble
tea.
Bubble tea. But it's funny. Now outside of that, that just proves that the market is willing to use an on-demand service for something as conventional as buying milk tea. Then you can tear down now to regular food. So Food Panda is there. Honestly, used to be there. I don't know why they closed, but Grab Food, Lala Eats. Is that it? Right? So food is a huge thing now, and food is normally an indicator of a healthy consumer market. So, and we get everything from Lazada, right? So we do go to the mall, look at the item, go back home and check if it's on Lazada, if it's there, or do it delivery.
Okay, so a lot of us are in different stages of our startups, right? So of course, if you say Grab, like they're ready to go anywhere, But what level of a startup should we be at considering then enter Philippines? Should we at least raise a round because there's not going to be money there, or should we go in there when we've already entered some other countries, or just go now, or should I go 6 months later? Maybe there will be some other regulation changes, or
you can go in now. But again, it's the nature of your business. Obviously, you're not going to try to compete with Grab and Angkas, etc. Right sharing, because it's tough. I guess this as a startup mentor, I'd probably say you should start hitting the niches. There are two schools of thought. Would you rather validate your business model in your local market that you're used to, or are you going to escape the competition in your local market and hit a battleground where nobody is? So niching, take advantage of the unique market characteristics of the Philippines and Manila, and just exploit the education of the online marketplace.
I mean, I would look at it as potentially a second market, right? Again, if you're looking at already hiring a bigger tech team, for example, we mentioned earlier, there are great reasons to do that in Philippines, right? Because you don't have to make sort of a language shift, right? I think it's a sizable market, and it's not just Manila. Also, it's worth looking at, the second, third biggest cities, right? In Philippines. So it's not too competitive, right? Where it's impossible or very difficult for you as a startup to be able to enter that market and actually validate or sort of localize your product for that market. So, I mean, I'm not sure I'm not sure it's the best place to raise money necessarily, but you don't need a lot of money to be able to validate your product. That's part of the beauty of it, right? So I think it's a good place to expand, right? As a second market after you're looking at your home market.
Look, can I add on the talent side? The BPO, since we've been strong in the BPO space for the past couple of years, you have access to a talent pool that has actually worked for US or Western startups. The teams of LinkedIn is there. You have the teams of Indenero. You have Canva. The Zalora team is there. So if you go in there now, you've got access to a pool, a talent pool, that knows about the startup dynamic. And I think that's a huge plus.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. Well, definitely there is like all these talents that, you know, are used to all these things, right? But there's also a saying around, like, you know, if you go into the Philippines and you hire someone that worked in a BPO, it takes them another, you know, $100 and they will just jump to the next opportunity because, you know, people are demanding because we are also competing with companies from the US and the UK. Any English-speaking countries are also finding talents in the Philippines. Like, how do we compete? Like, you know, is it culturally something we can do, or I mean, it can't just be pride.
Well, you know, it's not just with the U.S. We actually experienced brain drain even into Singapore. A lot of our talent was going to Singapore, both on the coding side and the creative side, UI UX, until they sort of controlled the migration of workers into Singapore. It made it more difficult to hire expats, right? So what they did was they moved to the Philippines. They set up their businesses there. And then now they're running the operations in the Philippines or in the home office.
Are they charging Singapore salaries and then working in the Philippines? Or?
Yes.
Wow.
Or maybe even just a little bit less because of the cost of living. But that's happening, and I guess it's really a problem for everybody. It just so happens, I guess if you put it that way, you've got more talent to lose than the other countries.
And I mean, I mean, it's a little like there are two things also, right? Like I think there's competition for talent in the Philippines in particular. You're actually competing with people leaving as opposed to staying in the Philippines, right? But there is something to be said about like being able to stay at home or sort of close to home, right? Like when you're working with a local company as opposed to kind of having to leave your family to move to the US and things like that. So you are seeing more people wanting to stay if there is an opportunity to do that. And I think the key thing also that startups have that, you know, like a soulless BPO might not, right, is, you know, you tend to be sort of mission driven, right, or changing the world / fixing a problem that people can relate to. And, you know, I mean, just like, again, all of our neighbors were, you know, a millennial driven, very young population, right? And having that sort of mission driven, something I believe in thing is a big motivator for young talent. So, you know, while I'm not saying there is no challenge to losing people to some of the bigger companies or more established companies, right? That's still a cultural barrier that needs to be overcome. I think that's true in Asia where it's more prestigious to work for.
Something you forgot to mention.
Yeah.
You're still competing with the Accentures.
Yeah.
Malaysia
But
is
at the same
also.
time, like I think there are movements of sort of cultural changes, and you know, I mean, being able to offer equity and like a fun workspace and all these things, right, that are keeping people and tech talent within, in this space.
I think I have just one last question to wrap up. I think a lot of us will probably be wondering, like, you know, setting up in the Philippines, how much does it take in US dollars? How long does it take? And what should we prepare for? Like, what's the first thing I should do? He's pointing at me and giving me that time out. Okay, just, you know, one-liner maybe.
One thing you should do is definitely talk to us. So www.kubo.com.ph. It is hard to do it on your own. You can't do it all online. So I think, you know, we're very friendly people. It's more fun in the Philippines. So definitely reach out and collaborate with people. I'm gonna end with that.
You can talk to Parony, I think he's here.
That's true.
Right there. Launch Garage did the MDEC. You were part of that last year.
Yes.
So
I went to Expand Philippines with
Expand,
MDEC.
yeah. And I think we're doing that this year already.
Yes, we are in July.
So
So
market
in July,
access program
so-
for the Philippines. Talk to MDEC.
They're right there.
Right there.
I would definitely advocate the program because I came from that program, and I have met them. I've been to their offices, and I've actually got an overview of the Philippines thanks to MDEC. So I advocate that the program for sure. Yeah. So I think that's time's up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
everyone. We'll be around for questions if you guys have anything to ask about entering the Philippines. Thank you.